here with Kate Raworth today, and we are going to be talking about a film we've made for Kate's work in Doughnut Economics. So Kate's well-known economist. She's written a book called Doughnut Economics, and she's also the co-founder of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And yeah, we were absolutely so delighted that she agreed to help us animate part of her work. We are animating a series of talks with Kate. We filmed them shortly after the pandemic, so it does take a bit of a while to animate these things, and hopefully when you see them, you'll see why they take a bit of time. But just welcome, Kate. Here. Thanks.
Thanks. Before you go any further, we're so kind to let you animate Doughnut Economics. I mean, it's obviously gobsmackingly incredible to have you, the original hairy hand of Andrew Park, animating Doughnut Economics. So it's just been, yeah, so far really, really fun. Really fun. Actually, you know what? I'm going to ask you before you show the animation, because you just mentioned, I think you're incredibly well known for your work of the RSA Animates series. Ken Robinson, David Harvey. I mean, just amazing animations that so many people have seen, and they've so brilliantly opened up whole intellectual worlds to people that, like, I've never studied psychology, I've never studied Marxist theory, I've never studied education, but suddenly there's this open, playful, really accessible and super memorable telling of it through your work. So the RSA Animate series, no doubt, so clearly just opened up a whole new world of animation that many other animators have also taken and done their own version of, and it's like, boom, this incredible blossoming of it. So kudos for that. Before you show this, before you show this new animation, I am very, very envious of your talk to the hand neon lights on the wall behind you.
Oh yeah, this is the first time I get to show it, really.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is this animation is in your new series, Talk to the Hand. And before you show it, like, just because it's different, right? You're in it too. It's me and you chatting with the animation. So just before we watch it, like, what is your philosophy, the intention with creating this Talk to the Hand series?
When we started the RSA Animate series, we didn't know what it would become, how it would transform the way people digest complex information online. And we're tremendously lucky to be at a point in time when certain things were coalescing together. So you had really great speakers from the RSA, people like yourself and David Harvey, as you've mentioned, Ken Robinson, Dan Pink, all of these people, coming through the stage of the RSA, which is an 300-year-old institution to do public good. So they have an events program where people come and speak and share their ideas. That's fantastic. And it was the early days of YouTube, when YouTube was just starting. These things are a decade old now. They're a bit creaky in places, but I think the content holds up. So it was the early days of YouTube, great speakers. And then I think through contacts with the Design Council, we managed to get in with the RSA, and they said, can you help us zhuzh up some of our talking head content? And we were like, oh yeah, sure, we'll give that a go. I didn't know how to animate at the time or what to do, but I did have an idea about how I like to work is to unfold information in space and join up disparate bits of content. If you go back to see the first RSA film, it's really, I think it was made on a flip cam, which is one of the first HD cameras. We didn't have the budget to make big, kit purchases of huge cameras at the time. They were really expensive. So this was one of the sort of cheap gateways into making content. And I was naive at the time, not knowing that in making videos, you can press pause and stop. So I was attempting to I literally try to draw really quickly in time with the audio. And it was...
What was the first one? Because I'm sure people might want to go back and look at it.
Weirdly, it was, I think, a Scandinavian sort of, I don't know, I think he's an economist, Stein Ringen, and he was talking about the economic consequences of Gordon Brown and the New Labour and how they'd spent an incredible amount of money. So it was quite a dry and technical subject. But I think it was just the fact that no one had ever seen drawing done like that before, in line with a voiceover and on screen, and it just sort of caught the zeitgeist, I suppose. And I think after that, they asked me to do another one and another one, and I got slowly better at doing them, and working out, oh right, that's how I can press pause, I can draw, I can take my time here, and obviously it's led to the Talk to the Hand series, because I think after a number of years, obviously things move on for institutions. You know, the RSA have moved in another direction, but I do feel there are important stories out there that everyone can access and need to access, and I wanted to use Talk to the Hand as a way of sort of showcasing what we can do with content, animation, drawing, illustration, plus have a bit more of a come out from behind the screen conversation with people, and do a deep dive. So obviously with the RSA films, they were 10 minutes of audio that were given to us, and it was kind of arbitrary what you got, so you work with that. Whereas with Talk to the Hand, we can set a kind of agenda, or at least an edit process. And you know, when we talked together in Oxford a few years back, we would talk for about 2.5 hours, I think. And it's from that conversation that we've got the 6 or so episodes coming up.
And I remember leaving that conversation. We talked and talked and talked, and I remember leaving thinking, "What the heck is he going to do with that?" Like, just that was all. I was just all over the place. Where's any coherence in that?
Well, that makes two of us, because I left that conversation going, "That's a lot." And but you know, part of that creative process is you've got to let it settle a little bit.
Yeah.
You've got to listen to it again, find the dry land in the ocean of content, and then start to piece it together.
Yeah.
Obviously we've got people behind the scenes helping out. Dave was editing content and putting the you know, taking the talking heads and just trying to make sense of them into chapters. What's this bit about? What's this bit about? So with the first film, it is the opener. It is the household management, you know. And I am always keen of finding out where things come from.
Right.
So I don't know whether it's a good point now.
Yeah, I think it is. Shall we watch it? Shall we watch it? Shall we do the
sort of unpack it a bit more?
The grand launch?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can unpack it afterwards. We can talk about it afterwards. Yeah. So who's lining it up? Here we go.
Can you see the screen still? Like, is it still the beginning shot? Perfect. Okay. I am going to put sound on it because that's essential, and then I'll mute myself, and then I'll play.
So economics is one of those things that is always, it's baffling to a lot of people.
Yes.
And in your book, you talk about economics and where it comes from, what it means.
And I think it's really helpful to break these words down. They take on a life of their own, but it's really helpful to go back to the roots of what it originally meant. So economics comes from 2 Greek words that have been squished together, ecos and nomos. Ecos means the household, and nomos means the art of management, or the norms. So economics means the art of household management. And you can take that from the level of an individual estate. In fact, the first author, Xenophon, wrote this pamphlet in ancient Greece about the economist, and it was the art of the household management. How do you manage your estate? How do you manage your slaves? And do you allow your wife to run the accounts? And how do you manage your grain reserves and your wine and your cloth? Later in his life, Xenophon took it to the level of the city-state. It was Adam Smith who took it to the level of nation-state. Thousands of years later, why does one nation as a household thrive while others are staggered? And now it's our turn to take it from this nation-state to the planetary household. So we can think of economics at all these different scales. But if you just step back and think, economics means the art of household management, there couldn't be more nobler quest than to ask, how do we manage our planetary household in the interest of all its inhabitants? And if that's what economics means, bring it on, let's do it. But it's not what it's meant in the past.
What's quite nice about that verbal metaphor is that it domesticates a global problem.
Yeah, as long as we don't overextend that metaphor. Margaret Thatcher famously overextended that metaphor. Said, well, households should live in their means, therefore nations should live in their means. Well, there's real differences. Individual households don't have a national bank that they can go to and create money when they need it, whereas a nation does. And so there's, as we all know, there's real dangers to overextending a metaphor.
Our household, the global household at the moment, what isn't working in the sort of 21st century?
It's not going well. Let's just think about how the 21st century began, with repeated crises. We've had financial meltdown in 2008, massive hit on millions of people's livelihoods, their homes. We live in an era of climate and ecological breakdown, and that's the overriding crisis of our times. That's given rise to protest and actually a rising crackdown on protesters. And then we just had 2 years of COVID lockdown. And these crises may emerge from different sources and they're reported really differently in the news, but they all show us that our lives are profoundly interconnected with each other and the rest of the living world, that they hit with really sharp inequalities of gender and of race, of wealth and power, between the global north and the global south. But they all arise from systems that are based upon endless expansion. So if you have a financial system that aims to endlessly expand, it will kick off a subprime mortgage market and the bubble will burst. If you have humanity endlessly expanding our use of fossil fuels and as resources, we will induce climate and ecological breakdown. If we're endlessly expanding human settlements into areas of wildlife, coupled with increasing global travel by flight, we create perfect conditions for zoonotic disease transfer and a global health pandemic. So these systems of endless expansion are driving crisis, and we see that showing up in that billions of people worldwide still cannot meet their most essential needs. And at the same time as that enduring human deprivation, we are running down the life support systems of our planetary home. That management, the household, we are destroying the stability of the climate. We are breaking down the web of life, acidifying the oceans, drying up lakes and rivers, the very living systems on which all of us depend.
You talked about global north, global south. A lot of us don't feel that in our modern, we can walk out in the streets and go and buy stuff in supermarkets and whatnot.
Yeah, and the global north is so powerfully provisioned by the rest of the world. As you say, we often don't feel it. There's food on the shelves in the supermarkets, there's water in the taps. We lead lives of comfort. Sometimes I feel like we live in the Hunger Games. It's like the global north is the capital of the Hunger Games, provisioned by everybody else to their detriment, to their leaving them in deprivation, because global trade rules, global financing and powers have structured the global economy so that so many of the world's resources are driven into the hands of those in the global north. And that means we are often really sensitive to the extremes of deprivation that people elsewhere live every day.
I mean, the crash was a perfect time to actually say, shouldn't we rebuild now based on that system not working?
Although sometimes in the midst of a crisis, you have to rescue something or save, because individuals' lives and families and households and jobs are so at risk. So there's always that moment, is it possible to completely rebuild in a crisis, but let's protect what we need to protect now, and then coming out of it, let's rebuild. But instead of coming out of it, rebuilding, it almost like just restored what was there.
And that reminds me of the Great Fire of London, when it burnt down. Had the opportunity, I think Christopher Wren, he designed London like Paris. It got constructed back on the exact same markings as before, instead of being a clear, like, hey, we can build a new city that won't burn down.
Right, but moments of crisis, as Naomi Klein brilliantly wrote about in her book, The Shock Doctrine, crisis is an opportunity for new ideas to come in, but which new ideas will come in? Crises can be an opportunity for renewal and reinventing, but they can also be an opportunity for entrenching existing power. So that's the importance of having powerful ideas that are lying around that actually are ready to be brought in to transform in a positive way the systems that we've inherited, rather than entrenching the old. Not that many people feel confident with economic equations, and there's a real danger that because economics gets performed so much in maths, that many people say, oh, that's too complex for me, that's too hard for me, I can't do that, I'm not a mathematician.
But everybody should be able to manage their own household, right? So if we reframe the verbal framing of economics as going back to the core, the source, which is household management.
Yeah, we're all part of this planetary household. We are so interconnected with the lives on the other side of the planet, and even though it's painful to realize, the way we are living here, the way we travel and heat our homes and consume and buy things and throw things away, that is having impacts on people worldwide, and that's painful. It's much easier to turn away from and ignore. But if we look at the planetary scale, we can't ignore it, we have to see it.
There we go. Fantastic to see it again. I have to say, Andrew, every single time I watch it, I see something new. So this time I particularly noticed the dog peeing on the Monopoly card.
And that's the Monopoly dog as well.
It's the Monopoly dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's a lot going on in there.
Yeah, well, yeah, it tells us quite a lot about your mind, mate. I have to say, there's a lot going on in there. And like, what I love about it is there's clear coherence and connection with the things that we were specifically talking about. But then all around that, there's Andrew Park bringing in all these things that he's seeing are connected. But it's not, I think it's not overwhelming, because we keep moving with the thread, and you can slow down and watch other things if you want.
Well, it's a testament to you that you're talking in such clarity and clear terms that it's easy to build stuff around, but still have that central narrative happening.
Well,
So
hang on, okay, thank you. You say I'm talking with clarity and clarity. I think what's really going on here, and I think why we've really enjoyed working on this together, is because we have one big thing in common, which is metaphors. Right. So I wrote Doughnut Economics very much using metaphors, because, you know, how do you explain the economy? I mean, it's just too complex and actually often too boring. But if we can use metaphors to help people, you know, the planet is like a household. In fact, that's what the word literally means. So let's take it metaphorically. What would it mean to manage our household in the interest of all our inhabitants? And you just clearly took that word and you ran with it, and you structured the whole thing around that. So there's so many different metaphors popping up in there around the crisis and the Monopoly cards falling down. So I think we're really connected by this playing with metaphor. And actually, even in this animation, you made it explicit, and you had us talking about, you know, Thatcher overextending the metaphor, because metaphors are brilliant. They can help us see how really complex systems that are invisible are like something that we do understand. Oh, it's like that. I get it. But then metaphors all have the end to their use, right? So don't overextend this metaphor. The map is not the territory. The metaphor is not the real thing. The economy is not a household, actually. Thank you, Maggie, because the Bank of England can create finance, whereas individual households cannot. So I really love the way you acknowledged within the animation the very thing that it all depends upon, which is playing with metaphors.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing that you say that when you overextend the metaphor, and when we're visually translating stuff for other people as well, is sometimes, you know, there is a danger when you think of a metaphor that's going to be this encapsulating thing, and then if you stress test it, there might be an element in that metaphor that doesn't translate. You can't get it to shoehorn into that metaphor. So you can go, you know, the house is this, and the bedroom is that, and then the kitchen is this, and then there's something in there that was like, that just won't work. You cannot shoehorn it in or jimmy it in there anywhere, and then the metaphor breaks, and then the illusion breaks.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thing as well.
Yeah. So some of the metaphors that I see coming, you know, again, whenever I watch it again and again, the metaphor of the life supporting systems of the economy. So you literally drew in this sort of life support machine, and you hear the little beep, beep, the medicine, you know, the hospital machinery kicking in, and then that baby in a bubble. I'm thinking, is that like the Matrix? Is that like Brazil? I don't know. It's making me think of all these extraordinary sci-fi films. But that metaphor of, yeah, the medical machinery, and we're on life support. In fact, the planet is life support and it's on life support. So that's a double metaphor. That you took my mention of the Hunger Games very literally and drew it in. And that really connects to me with what I think is at the center of this. And there's a tension that I think you've bridged, which is, I'm just really aware that, right, you and I are two British people sitting in, we were sitting in Oxford, for heaven's sake, like at the heart of the
Yeah.
kind of historical empire. And it still has, you had an octopus, it still has tentacles today. So there we are sitting talking about the world. And that's why I brought in the Hunger Games. Like, we're in the capital. We have to make that visible. And you showed it. But what I love is that you took the metaphor of the household, which sounds uniting and unifying, but you didn't make it sound like, oh, we're, you know, one big world, all in this together, because I think you really managed to put together the concept of this is a planetary household. And yet, look at these very, very visceral differences between the global north and the global south, and all the ways, and I keep seeing more and more, all the ways you showed the power relations between the two, the flow of resources, the dumping of impacts, and the way the camera pans from, you know, builds the global north, then builds the global south, and then we see these relations. That's really valuable, I think, because it shows, yeah, this is one household, but wow, look how dominating the global north power is in all so many ways.
Yeah, there's interesting, actually, now you talk about it, and it's something that I possibly overtly didn't recognize. When you say household, there are a lot of buildings in this piece. You know, there are the fishing villages and the shanty towns in the global south, and there's obviously the skyscrapers and the sort of big tech buildings, or the financial institutions, and also the monopoly counters on the monopoly board as well. There are a lot of buildings represented, and I think that was just seriously, I haven't thought about it. It was just built into the process, I think, showing households, or at least structures, as a kind of recursive motif throughout.
Something you did there, and that I've often wanted to, I always had an idea of an art installation, is if you had a room, like even if you take the room I'm in right now, like, and you'd have it like as if a kind of a waxwork person sitting in a room, and then attached to, say, the jacket that I'm wearing would be a thread that then connects, I don't know, to another scene or a photograph of where did this cloth actually come from? What factory was it woven in, and what materials have gone into it, and who actually stitched this hem? And how my life here and the screen I'm talking to you through, who assembled this computer that I'm talking through, who, you know, picked and packed the food we eat, to be able to show those threads of connection from the great sucking sound of the global north, drawing all the resources, because this is where the capacity to pay. So the world's resources are going in this direction, but the connections, the impacts, and I just think the way you've drawn it into the animation shows that more viscerally than any other drawing I can think of. And of course, it's even better when it's animated, because you're seeing these, you're hearing the sound, you're seeing the movement, you're seeing those flows. So yeah, I would just love to hear you reflect at all on how you thought about making that work.
Well, it's interesting you say sound as well, because that was something that I wasn't overtly, you know, I didn't put every single sound in. Our animation team, Phil, Joey, put those sounds in, so they had those choices to make. And when I was watching it, I was like, I haven't heard that sound before. You know, when you said you saw things in it that you hadn't seen before, I was like, oh, but that's a great sound to go with that. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that this sound is also important as the visuals. But the threads that connect things, I think the way that I like to work particularly is that unpacking the suitcase, laying everything out on the bed so that you can see what you've got, is, even though, you know, it looks like a massive landscape with things going on in it, that all I'm doing is showing things quite flat, saying, right, these are all connected somehow. How are they connected? And in the process of doing that from start to finish, I'm finding out how they're connected. I'm finding out all of this stuff. You know, there are lots of things in there that I put in there that you didn't talk about, but that they are in there in what you mean. So, you know, you've got the parties at number 10, for example.
Yeah.
They're in there, and you know, I'll probably put that out on social media. You can actually do a close-up of that, and you see what's going on. You've got the suitcase full of booze, and you've got, you know, all the shenanigans that were going on, horrific. Well, people were suffering. So there are shades in it that, you know, you have to just pick out and think, what is that related to? Like you mentioned, the octopus, for example, you know, and then if you look at Cayman Islands, because that octopus is actually sitting on a map of the Cayman Islands, and it is the Cayman Islands because, you know, that's where a lot of the money's stashed away. And then there's the shell companies that are sort of nestled inside of each other. They're all in there, you know, and I being able to just listen to what you talk about and then read into it and then think, how would I show this? And I'm not trying to be, you know, make fun of it in terms of, aha, isn't it funny? I think humor plays a very big role of putting a foot in the door and saying, right, look at this. You know, you might think it's funny, but there's a serious intent to it when you get that foot in the door. I think it breaks down a lot of barriers that way, humor, and it can unearth information that you probably wouldn't have wanted to see if it was presented in a straight fashion. Does that make sense?
I wanted to ask you about that actually, because also I think what you do with the humor, like you often take a metaphor and then make it so literal it's kind of ridiculous. Like it's right, you like Thatcher literally pulling a belt around the world. So you're literally belt tightening. There we go. Let's make it completely literal. And then it makes the metaphor, indeed, the politics behind it. It brings humor, but also it's a kind of, as you said, a kind of humorful critique of that. And people will come along with it because it's got a play. In fact, I was at a economics festival called Kilconomics in Kilkenny in Ireland a couple of years ago, and they bring together economists with comedians on the stage for a series of conversations. And it's the same kind of thing, because you've got a couple of economists and a comedian just lobbing in funny jokes, and it means that all of us can be more jokey. And I found I was able to be critical of somebody else's view in a much more playful, amiable, light-hearted way, because we were using humor. And I realized this, you know, we can sit here and laugh about what we disagree on so much more and go further than if we were just trying to talk about it really straight. So I see a real connection between the humor of Kilconomics and the humor that you bring in here, the kind of cheeky twists, or even the COVID parties in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it's disarming, isn't it? And also, you know, if you look at the detail of when we talk about the crash and the monopoly cards that lead to the monopoly board, all of those chance cards are actually, I've got put statements on that relate to how we got to the global crash.
Well, let's have a look. Amy's going to zoom in. So on
might
those
be able to
monopoly
read,
cards,
I think you can read some of them actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
So down
I was
on the
actually noticing
bottom
today.
left, Amy, I think.
Yeah.
There's the shell company.
Yeah.
So if you pan left a bit. So that's,
There we are. There's some of the cards.
yeah,
So
there's those, but actually on the other side of the map where you see the people, that's the ones down bottom left there. So,
the economy took a nosedive, but you cleaned it up in a big bank bailout. It's too big to fail, apparently. Collect 100 billion. You see, your detail is kind of off the scale, man. It's beautiful.
yeah, I mean, this one, privatize the NHS for the benefits of cronies.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, that's happening right now.
Oh, yeah. And actually, if you whiz up, Amy, the tap, where's the waterworks?
Oh, yeah.
And I really noticed today, yeah, so that's it. Go right a bit. There we are. There's waterworks. I noticed today, as I was saying something like, you know, I think I said we have clean water here and this place. And it's like, no, we have sewage, which is exactly what's in the news today in the UK. Again, because we have sewage, again, because our rivers are so foully polluted. So it's this clever, yeah, the familiar Monopoly card, but then you actually put reality on top of it. Let's look at some of this beautiful and vile combined. I mean, the living world when it first springs up is so beautiful. I think it's when I first say, you know, we're deep. All of these crises make us realize we are deeply interconnected with the rest of the living world. And there's me. You've drawn me this kind of like gushingly happy.
Yeah, the hills are alive. Yeah.
I'll let you get away with that. But you know, it's in this living world, just it's beautiful. And then you utterly defile it.
Yeah, and interesting going back to the sound that the guys put on it when it was animating, all that mechanical digging
Yeah.
and building and drills and all of that stuff that, you know, and, you know, what I wanted to show here was, and I said to the animators, you know, just as it continues, just make it dirtier and dirtier. The sky goes blacker and blacker. And those growth, you know, those growth chart arrows, lines going up through the buildings are all, you know, it's almost like a horrible weather, isn't it?
Yeah. It's brilliant. We're going to open up for questions in a minute. So if anybody's got questions, please do put them in the Q&A box. I'm just going to ask you one last thing. So as we watched it, this image, of course, appears piece by piece. It began with, what was it? It just Xenophon landing on the screen, I think.
Yeah.
Back in that top corner. And then, and as you know, we can see you created the sort of, from the individual state to the city state to the planetary, and then you created this sort of blue circle with Atlas holding up the planet, and then moved to create the rest of the image, and you came back and layered over again and again, and it works incredibly powerful to see that. And then we pull out and see the whole. And when you're thinking about constructing it, you're also having to think, well, actually people might sometimes just see the whole, and how do you make that work?
I study fine art, so I'm constantly, you know, walking back from a canvas, if you like, you know, to see how the shapes work. And over the last few years, my kind of personal art practice, I started to make a lot of collage, and I've realized that I am a collagist. And I don't mean that in just terms of just making paper collages. I mean, how I work and how I approach life is collaging. So I build things by ripping them out of space and time and putting them together and seeing how they look together, you know, juxtaposing things. And it's a very organic process. So I only arrive at certain things or certain answers halfway through a process, and then it will probably inform me to say, we've got to go back to the beginning now. So it's this constant dance I do. And it's really probably ultimately frustrating for everybody that works with me, because, you know, animation is apparently a costly process and you should all have it worked out at the beginning because of pipelines and everything's worked out, costs and blah, blah, blah. But I can't work like that. I can't say, right, I know what it's going to look like in the end, because I don't. I know I've got a rough idea of how it should feel.
Yeah.
And then I kind of blindly stub my toes as I grope my way through it. And then, you know, certain things appear and tell me what they need to be, or so it is very much an organic process, and I think it works doing that way. It is hard doing it that way. I mean, I wish it was clear in my head at the beginning, but it never is.
So if anyone has any questions or reflections, we're really happy to discuss them. Don't know, Amy, if you want to bring any through, or I can, got plenty more things I'd love to.
We don't have anything yet from the crowd, which I again want to encourage everyone to participate. But I do have a couple questions that I think I've gleaned online. This one's for Andrew. From a practical perspective, how long did this endeavor, like looking at this graphic especially, but also the animation, how long did this take to produce?
It's hard to say, because it was being worked on in line with other things that we were doing, you know. So you know, client work and things like that. We were taking doing that as well. So it would be handled in fits and starts. If I was to sort of condense all of that work into an appropriate timeline, I would say it'd probably take about 3 months to make if we were at it, going at it. But, you know, you've got to build in that thinking time. You've got to build in that you know, throwing things away and redoing them time. I don't think as I said, it's not a linear process, and it's very hard to say this is how long it takes.
And Andrew, just for people who might be interested, I bet there's a bunch of people who've joined because they're really interested in animation as a skill and an art. Am I right in thinking? I think I'm right in thinking, but not all of this is drawn from scratch. So it's probably also hard to say how long it takes, because quite a number of the elements you've got already, almost like in a library. For example, over on the left-hand side, near the bottom corner, is a a pan of boiling water. I definitely know that polar bear. I've seen that polar bear around. So
he's a motif. I would say that everything I do is always drawn from scratch, and that's not because I want to. Yeah.
Oh wow! I thought you were bringing them in. Okay, this is drawn from scratch. Wow.
Everything.
Wow.
And it's because I lose stuff, right? I don't know where I've put it, and so I'm like, oh, that polar bear. Where's that? I don't know what it's either. It's on the server somewhere. I don't know. I can't be bothered looking for it. I'll just draw it again.
Wow. Okay.
So everything is drawn from scratch in this. So no, we never in any of the work we do have a off the peg here. We'll just, you know, adapt this for you. No, everything, and it's annoying that you have to draw it all from scratch.
Oh, I'm really glad I asked you, because I completely assumed it was the other way around. Okay.
No, everything is drawn from scratch. Yeah.
We do have another technical question from the crowd. JST iPad asks, Andrew, can you talk about the technical process and what's involved?
Do you mean from a drawing point of view, or do you mean from an animation point of view?
Oh gosh, JST iPad, if you want to type in again, either one, but yes. Maybe you can, from a
I'll tell you what, I'll answer both then, shall I? So drawing wise, the first thing is obviously we had to go and have a chat with you, Kate. We talked and we talked for 2.5, 3 hours, something like that. Collected all of that content and made rough edits of what we thought the topics would be. So this is the first one, which is the household management one. The second film we're making in the series is actually the donut itself, the meat and potatoes, pardon the food metaphor, of the donut.
You're going to turn this little 2D bit of cardboard into something wackily wonderful on the screen. I can't wait to see it. So
we are making a huge donut with the 9 planetary boundaries, and then unrolling that donut to show a kind of parallax view of the world. So it you know, and this is where you can do a lot with visualization and animation. You can pretty much do anything. Anyway, I digress. We can talk about that in a bit if you want to talk about the new one that's coming up. But then we make the edits, and then there's a point where I would thumbnail everything. So I think early in the process, we made a really long edit, and it was like a 2-hour film. It was ridiculous. And I thumbnailed it all. So which means really rough drawings that just charted all of the content. And through that process, you end up thinking, here's a little thing I could use, or this might be valuable. And then what you do is you open up the big picture, and then you start to block in some shapes. But then I've worked this out about myself. I'm not very good at mapping things out. As I said, with an end in mind, I started drawing Greece, the ancient Greece stuff, the Xenophon stuff up on the top left. And I got really into that, hyper focused in drawing Greek temples and things like that, and I just got into drawing ancient Greece, and I really enjoyed that side of things. But then I thought I sometimes get too involved in the research of like, what did Greek slaves look like, and what did all of that stuff, carts and shopping and what, I just get too tied up in it, and then it slows me down, because I'm enjoying myself in drawing all that stuff. But what I like about that bit in the end is that the Greek stuff on the left is kind of sparse, surprisingly, as I've told you. I've spent a lot of time drawing it. And then the stuff on the right of the picture is really dense. And I quite like that, because it's almost then dealing with time. It's dealing with, back then things were simpler, and now we filled everything up with all this stuff. So in terms of animation, we work in Photoshop. So this is all built in Photoshop, and we use smart objects. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with Photoshop, but basically, because an image like this, as you can imagine, has about 7 million layers of Photoshop in Photoshop. And that's really unruly for a computer to handle. So we break it down into separate PSDs. So the Greek stuff on the left there would be its own file, and then it's linked to it. So we have the big picture, which is just a pasteboard for holding lots of different PSDs as smart objects, smart files, and they all are all linked and they speak to each other. But if you said, how do you do the animation? I don't know. They're magicians, the animation team. I just say, make it work, make it move, and then they do it. It's fantastic.
We have another question from Michelle Thompson. I think maybe this might be a question for both Kate and Andrew. Will there be a hook on end of this wonderful animation, enticing people to ask, but what can we do?
Oh, that's a great point, actually, Michelle, because so this is the first in a series of 5, I think. And so this one, standing alone, I think Michelle's pointing to, like, it's overwhelming. It's like, well, is this just it? Is this just how things are? And this animation, I think, describes how things are rather than what can we do. So future ones in the series, I think, will lead on to that. Do you want to say more, actually, Andrew, about, so this first one is sort of, this is the state of the concept of the household and the freaking state of the household. The second one introduces the concept of the donut, so putting not growth, but thriving, meeting the needs of all within the means of the living planet at the heart of our vision. And that one's going to explain this concept, take it out of flat 2D and make it beautifully animated. But then the future ones, I believe, I hope, because we haven't made them yet, will be much more about, okay, what can we do in terms of far more regenerative design, far more distributive design in the world, right? And starting to look at the kinds of things that need to change.
Yeah, so I think each of these films are about just granularity of focus. So this is a very big, bird's eye view of the state of play. And then the next one will be the donut itself, which is laying out your theories and showing how things are connected in that sense. And then the successive ones, you're right, will be zooming into sort of individual initiatives that we talk about, or that you allude to, and then we research what you've alluded to, and then start joining those bits up. There will be another one, which is a kind of side shuffle to talk about modeling language, where these models actually came from economically, the growth models and the Kuznets stuff, all of that. I think visual metaphor, and it's just like we've talked about today. I enjoyed talking to you about how you devised thinking visually about a problem, which I think is also very important, where the donut came from and all of the other surprising food related visual metaphors that you were using, sandwiches and layers and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think unpacking some of that is great, to know where people use visualization to help them solve problems. And I think that's really important, that you as a visual thinker, Kate, as well, you know, you got to your donut by thinking visually.
Yeah, and thinking. So the subtitle of Doughnut Economics is 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And actually, the opening line of the book, let me see if I can get it right. It says, the most powerful tool in economics is not a calculator. I happen to have one here, or even maths. I think I say it is a pencil, because with a pencil we can redraw the world. And for me, that was what I put at the beginning of the book, because the book was all about not here are the policies, here's what we should do, but rather here's ways of thinking that will give us, in very different contexts, in very different times and parts of the world, a way forward to transform that place. And for me, ways of thinking start with the models that are in our mind, the visual models. So the brilliant cognitive framer George Lakoff talks about verbal framing, right? Don't argue against tax relief, argue for tax justice. And in the same way that he was helping us look at the metaphors, the metaphor of relief, who doesn't want relief, right? So tax relief must be a good thing. The metaphors that are written into a lot of our political language, that you have to catch them and reframe them. I wanted to make visible the metaphors or the assumptions that are written into our visual models. So the diagrams in the heart of our economy. So a pencil, literally we can redraw the world. And so I'm just thrilled that you've literally shown with your pencil, your pen, how we can make visible the dynamics of the world. This kind of global north, global south is one way of depicting that really exploitative, extractive relationship. And how can we then keep doing that in the future animations that we work on together?
Yeah,
So
and also the fact, as you mentioned in metaphor, you know, we're all hardwired to think about the world in certain ways, and verbal metaphors have driven us, the way we express ourselves with language, you know, up meaning good, or, you know, all of those sort of things, where I've tried to allude to that in this first thing, which is, you know, that the growth is going off screen. It's unchecked. It can't be held. And that almost teetering motion you have on the right hand side of that diagram, the picture there, is it's going to teeter, it's going to rip its foundations, it's going to break, you know, and all of these things are hardwired into our language, I think. And I wanted to try and visually express that somewhat.
yeah, I know there's one question I just saw, which is saying, you know, what are we going to do with this wonderful animation? How is it going to be made available, and who is it aimed at? So let's just talk about some of the ways it is available, right? So it's now on YouTube.
Yeah.
And anybody's welcome to share it and, you know, play it in workshops.
Please do.
Please do, and you know, use it. And also, we're going to make the image. Maybe you want to say more about this, Andrew. We want this image to be available for people to print as a poster. Just because I just want to acknowledge, Andrew, this is phenomenal generosity on your part. You have created this. We have not got a financial contract here. We're working together as collaborators because you said we want to make this happen. So you're doing what we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab do, is create resources and ideas like this that we then put in the commons and invite people. You know, you're just going to make it free for people to print. So can you just say a little bit more about how the idea of being able to print it out, and who you were thinking might print this out, and what might they do with it?
So what we'll do with the print is actually, there'll be a number of ways of having to get it, which will be, you know, a PDF version, which will have, you know, just sign up, give us your email, and we'll send you the PDF. But there will also be, once all 6 films are made in this series, your series, Kate, we'll be doing a newspaper, which, you know, once again, we'll print some copies, get in touch with us. We will send you the newspaper with the double page spreads with, so the format of this actually, so the size of this corresponds to a broadsheet newspaper. So it'll be a broadsheet newspaper that you'll get sent with the 6 spreads, 5 or 6 spreads in there. It will probably have a lot of the transcript in there from our discussions as well. obviously that's there as a resource, hopefully, you know, for schools, colleges, people working with this content can just use it.
And
In
if
the
I could just riff on
future,
that, just at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, that's really important for us because actually, when Doughnut Economics was published first, the first people to get in touch with me on Twitter were teachers. And it was just that feeling of teachers getting in touch saying, I'm pushing aside the syllabus today. I'm going to teach my students the donut. It's not on the curriculum, but I know this is what they should be learning. So I've just got this huge affinity and allegiance to the teachers who are the pioneers and bringing just desperate to bring in really new, challenging, edgy material into the classroom. So, you know, I've got 15-year-old kids who are doing geography GCSE and love it, but I would love them, whether at GCSE or A level, you know, secondary school, to have access to this, to have, like you say, some of the transcript, to be able to watch the animation as it's being created, and then just poring over the detail as we've just been doing a little bit here. Look at the detail you put in ancient Greece, the detail of the Monopoly cards, what's on those cards, what's going on, and just getting into the detail of it. And because there's a lot of power, you're depicting a lot of powerful companies, powerful relationships here in humor, in cartoon style, that I just think it could be a really great educational resource. And I want to get this in the hands of teachers and hear from them. Okay, this is how I would bring this into my classroom. This is how I would invite my students to interact with it and reflect on it. So I'm really looking forward to doing that work.
you know, you've given me sort of a brainwave there. I mean, I'd be open to, you know, printing these things out and going into classrooms myself. Maybe we could go into classrooms together and talk about them and say, you know, you from the perspective of the donut and me from the perspective of how to use pictures powerfully to tell stories that mean something.
Maybe we can do this again as a big global online classroom when we've got the whole series.
I think that's a great idea, and I'd love to do that.
Let's do it.
Definitely.
So, and
think-
there's going to be a link to all this on Doughnut Economics Action Lab's website, which is doughuteconomics.org. So we're going to be having a link there if you want to go and find it there, or you would be able to find it on YouTube. Talk to the Hand. What donut?
Yeah, and I mean the talk to the Hand series as well. I mean, you're just one of the brilliant guests we have in the series. We have us 5 speakers in season 1, which we're working on at the moment. Yourself.
You want to name some of the other? I know you've done some work with the philosopher Nigel Warburton.
Nigel Warburton, Roman Krasnaric, Ian
So you're bored of
Ian McGilchrist, and a fascinating lecture about dream therapy as well, with a psychotherapist called Dan Lawrence. Yeah, it's all good. The interesting conversations, and surprisingly, they all have overlap. You know, which is what I love about my work and my job, is that, you know, I get to learn all this fascinating stuff from really great people like yourself.
Well, can I just flip that? It's just the biggest crazy privilege that you said, I think I want to animate Doughnut Economics, and not just one, but a whole series. I still can't quite believe it. And it's just been a huge pleasure to make this first one, and I can't wait to create and release the rest of them. And then let's work with, you know, with educators, with community groups. Like we work with so many community organizations around the world that I know they're looking for really fun things to bring in and show in their conversation, discuss. So I think this is going to fly far. So I'm really aware it's probably time for us to wrap up in a minute. I'm just going to say, Andrew, thank you so much for launching this work. It's a thrill and a privilege. Thank you to Amy, not Leonora today, but Amy behind the scenes. And thank you to everybody. I really want to say thank you to everybody at We Are Cognitive, because I know that I'm really aware of it at Doughnut Economics Action Lab. People often see me first, but there's a team of 14 of us doing incredible work. At We Are Cognitive, you may think of, you know, you see Andrew's hairy hand, you see, oh, it's Andrew Park. There's a huge team.
Yeah, there is.
This
and
work
they're
is
all exceptionally talented and work hard. And the lovely thing about all of them is they are into using pictures and animation to change the world. You know, they're all invested in that.
Yeah.
Which is great. You know.
And thank you to everybody who's joined us today. I know there's some people who've come for if you came for donuts, I hope it didn't disappoint. They're only virtual. If you came for the economics, I hope it rings your bell. If you came for the animation, you just got a masterclass with one of the world's best animators. And I hope it inspires people to make their own animations. Like, I mean, that could be another thing. You know, what would it mean for others?
Yeah,
to
yeah,
take these ideas?
definitely. If you know, maybe that's something we investigate, which is what are your animated responses to this work? You know?
I sense a Doughnut Economics, not a competition, but like an invitation for
Oh, that's a great idea.
test of ideas. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Well, I want to also, sorry, Kate, I want to thank you for your incredible work and your generosity and your time. Thank you.
Big pleasure. A friend in metaphor is a great friend indeed. Let's see what we can cook up next.
Excellent.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Kate.
Thanks, everybody.